history faculty, and sort of as a hobby, he's been doing the history of Lee. And so he's done some very, very interesting work. Last January, he presented on Lee's integration during that difficult time period. And today, he's going to talk about the time when Lee transitioned from being a Bible school to being a liberal arts college. Also a traumatic time on the campus. And John presented this research at a conference, and so we sort of latched onto it because it's really, to me, a really key point in the history of Lee. So, go ahead, Josh.
This, the hobbies, that's pretty accurate. It is sort of a hobby. About 4 years ago, I was asked to present at a symposium, some church-related schools talking about origins. So we did a paper on origins. And then the origins paper led me to write a paper about constituencies, which this is a sort of condensed version of, which then led me to do another paper, which led me to do another paper. So yeah, it is sort of a closet industry, I guess, on the side. So what I'm going to do, because this is what historians do when they're nervous in front of people that are very well educated, is I'll tend to read as opposed to present. If you're my students, I would glad hand it and walk around. But I'll try to come off the script occasionally as we go along here. Let y'all ponder this. The reason, of course, we have PowerPoint is to distract you. So, a careful reading of the history of church-related colleges and universities in the United States suggests that we will all move steadily toward a secular identity in which our religious roots are a recognized, if embarrassing, reality. That's the history. The two most prominent studies of church-related schools, George Marsden's Soul of the American University and James Burchard's Dying of the Light, conclude that accommodation to culture causes a move toward secularity. This trend was further reinforced when Marsden, with Bradley Longfield, published a collection of case studies which found a general decline in religious tradition in a variety of church-sponsored schools. Philip Gleason, in Contending with Modernity, found a similar pattern in Catholic schools. This movement usually takes decades. It can accelerate and then break suddenly. It varies based on local conditions, but school after school after school has walked the exact same path. In the literature, there are many variables used to measure Christian environment on campus. Some of the more prominent are hiring standards, denominational control, curricular requirements that make up the student body, behavioral standards, and campus religious life. While there is some debate about the utility of such measures, their presence or absence does help place schools on a continuum from traditionally religious schools to secular institutions, or perhaps from conservative to liberal within church-related sort of institutions. Changes in these measures, like symptoms of a degenerative disease, suggest deeper shifts in the school's identity. In many cases, the liberalization of standards in these areas equates to a slow drift away from the school's distinctly Christian mission and toward a liberal accommodation of culture. No single adjustment of a measure in itself indicates that a school is losing its Christian identity. Yet in combination, these changes move a school towards an identity informed by a broader culture, not by our faith. In other cases, schools, to borrow a term from evolutionary biology school in Hellridge, change through the process of punctuated equilibrium. They change very little for long periods of time. Then, some catalyst causes rapid change before the schools settle at some new resting point. Catalysts can be varied: financial crisis, leadership change, denominational shifts, even a desire to satisfy some new audience, a new constituency, if you will. It's this last catalyst, changing constituencies, that caught my interest as part of Lee's history. In particular, I was curious to know if our pursuit of SACS accreditation would act as a catalyst for change within the mission and identity of the school. And secondarily, did the accreditation affect the quality of our product? And maybe for discussion, we can talk about how does that speak to us today. The picture of the dorm room is kind of washed out. I just moved my daughter into Atkins Ellis like 2 hours ago. I was in shorts and a t-shirt, changed up my office, cleaned up a little bit for you guys. And I was thinking, wow, her room is really big compared to these two women's. The other thing that really fascinates me is that she has a Scorpions album cover on her, which seems a little unusual for the era. Anyway.
Shorts and t-shirt, too.
Yeah, well, it's incognito. I mean, yeah. I'd be in real trouble at night. Okay, so, things I was thinking about. Now, Few of these issues concern the first generation at the Church of God's Bible Training School. For over 2 decades, BTS was small, under 100 students, shared facilities with other Church of God branches, was staffed by Church of God pastors, upheld strict holiness standards, which we could talk about, would be really fun, and followed a narrowly defined mission of training and equipping young people of the church for effective service and ministry. However, by early 1940s, the school had come to operate as a loose affiliation of educational units, which included correspondence courses, an academy, a music school, a religious education division, a junior college. A decade later, they added a 4-year Bible college, eventually also a liberal arts college. Increasing numbers of Church of God young people were seeking training did not necessarily lead to the pulpit or to the mission field. The addition of a junior college, I believe, signaled the end of the decline, I should say, very symptomatic of the BTS model. The addition of a 4-year Bible college accelerated that change. It is reinforced by a physical relocation, and you probably know this, I assume you know it, back to Cleveland, and a name change to Lee College. If you're new, it's not that Lee, okay? So don't worry, it's not Robert. You can tell people it's not. It's who? Flavius Josephus. Just tell them that, and they'll be like, whoa, that's really not Robert. It's a good thing. And within this mix also, there's this question of accreditation. By the way, I put entrepreneurial because I think that if there's, I have themes in my mind that identify Lee over time, and this is certainly one of them. Lee has always been very entrepreneurial. Something new, try it, see if it works. If it fails, try something else. We had branch colleges in Chicago one time, like for a year, failed. It's okay, tried another one. So I think this is very much part of our DNA here as well. So, this accreditation thing. Often in the story of a Christian school's drift, accreditation is used by independently minded administrators to move the school away from its Christian roots and away from the sponsoring denomination. Accreditation is a great thing to blame if you're an administrator, if you're a faculty trying to get out from under the church and say, well, SACS caused us too, right? I didn't find that was the case with Lee. For while school and denominational officials often use SACS standards to measure and consolidate, to improve, to grow the colleges, the changes were driven by, overseen, and approved by the denomination's executive council and at times votes by the General Assembly. You really have to remember that at this point, Lee is not a separate institution. It is just a branch of the Church of God. So it's just a operating piece of the church. So the church has full control over the process. Still, some of the denomination recognize that accreditation by secular agencies could pose a threat to our identity, to our mission. In creating the junior college, the church made it clear that the new program and any accreditation by SACS had to be accomplished, quote, without adversely affecting the Bible training school, unquote. However, the church also understood that increasing numbers of its young people were seeking higher education, were determined that Lee would provide the answer to that need. That they wouldn't go to the JUCO here and then go to UTK and then identify as Vols, which is a bad faith in probably most people's minds.
Go Vikings.
Rumble. J.H. Walker drove this point home in 1940 at the General Assembly when he said, there is only one place we can be certain our young men and women, the backbone of the church of tomorrow, will receive this training, that is, and this is the way it's printed, a Church of God school. Sorry, that's yelling, right? A Church of God school with Church of God teachers, with Church of God management, with Church of God rules, with Church of God name, with Church of God students. Amen.
That's the offering.
I'm Presbyterian, so that wouldn't work well for me. But it certainly says really clearly, right, what the identity of the school was and what they wanted to keep it in 1940. Again, one of my questions is how does SACS work with this? I have viciously attacked this paper and excised tons of data, trying to get it down to where I won't lose you in the maneuverings of accreditation. But it is a process. So it starts really in 1940 with this very clear call for accreditation. The Church of God grants permission. And then it works its way through a whole bunch of series of layers until finally in December of '69 you get the formal okay from SACS for a very different enterprise than you would have seen in 1940. The school is radically different. So I'll try to walk a little quickly through that, sort of quickly. I'm only on page 4. Lee Sedley worked his way through all this hierarchy then, right? And you can see some of these. The Academy gets SACS accreditation. The JUCO joins JUCO Association, which has a little bit of standard. and later get SACS accreditation. I think, though, from what I've seen, really the requirements for these accreditations are pretty minimal. They don't intrude at all upon what Lee was doing or at the time. So in 1953, things get a little more interesting in that Lee begins a Bible college that offers a bachelor's degree in biblical education. Lee's Cadillac boldly claimed that it was God's school for God's business, which my daughter, upon hearing that, said that maybe the business school should appropriate that. And fit it over the top. She's an English major, so she has that kind of attitude. I was a business major before I was going to say that. Yeah, we know, we've seen people leave the script and how awful these things are. In '59, the Bible College sought and gained accreditation from the Accrediting Association of Bible Colleges. You'll see this pop up, the AABC, I'll call it. And the AABC looked at it and said, we'll accredit you, but you got some serious problems. One is your organization's muddled. I mean, financially, with your staff, you had people teaching in all these different branches, sharing budgets, sharing resources. You couldn't tell where the academy ended, the high school, and where the JUCO started and where the Bible school started. It was all just sort of mashed together. The other problem they had, and I think it's really fascinating, given the LEAP grant, and I'll read you a bit from the report, is the ABC evaluator said, many of Lee's students were first-generation college students from underprivileged homes. Lee sought to raise, quote, the sights and standards for the denomination, but cannot be too far in front of the educational and cultural level of its people, unquote. So this is still the first generation and a half of Church of God still. I mean, we're still very early. This isn't the Church of God of the 2000s. Within Lee's quickly shifting framework, two other changes of note took place. First, in '56, Lee opened an unaccredited 4-year liberal arts college. This experiment graduated 2 classes and then closed because SACS said that was a bad idea. At the same time, Lee began to shut down the academy. In '58, they recommended closing the 9th grade, the General Assembly did, in order to concentrate our efforts towards a full accreditation of our junior college and Bible college at the earliest possible date. The academy continues till '65 when it's completely shut down, largely to help satisfy SACS requirements. In '64, President Hughes has an interesting legacy, does he not? I think at Lee, mostly, he's tended to be remembered for his second presidency, which was very difficult. I think people have tended to forgotten his first presidency, which was a time of remarkable growth and change, and in fact probably saved the institution. So I got there's young Dr. Hughes, which is the one I want us to remember at this point, this first time. He and the dean met with SACS, and SACS talked through some things to start working on, if you will. And they delivered. Lee promised 3 new buildings, science, administration, and a dorm, which they delivered. 20,000 new books for the library. The quality of those books was varied, but we did get 20,000 new volumes for the shelves. Land purchases, an increase in enrollment. Enrollment goes from the 300s to 1,000 views. It's pretty remarkable. At the same time, I would note, though, and I've read historians hide all of our notes, where we get our sources and footnotes. I read through all the correspondence of the presidents up through '86. Dr. Collins not allowed me to read off his personal correspondence, but up until then, I've read thousands of letters by the presidents. And consistently, you see these letters that somebody says, I was driving down a Coe Street, and I saw somebody I'm pretty sure was a Lee student, and I believe they had makeup on, jewelry on. I saw a bare shoulder. I saw a man whose hair touched his collar. You can go, there's a whole list of these things, right? And invariably, the president takes the time to personally respond and say, that's not the case. We are still holiness. And then my favorite part, the base excuse is, and kid you, this isn't true, we do have a few Baptists. The list is incredible. Sandals, going to football games. There's a lot of interesting bits. But Hughes, responds. He says, he's responding to one pastor. He says, we're not simply the spirit of compromise that exists in many Pentecostal schools. He wanted to claim that all Lee faculty experienced the baptism of the Holy Spirit. that we were still very much that school that Walker called for, by the Church of God, for the Church of God, with the Church of God. In 65, Hughes, speaking to the lead faculty, said that there was a danger from accreditation, from sort of changing mission. If we endeavor to be liberal enough to attract a number of outsiders, a new constituency audience, I mean by that those not of our faith. Now I think he's thinking more not Church of God Pentecostal, not necessarily Buddhist or something. We cannot expect to build lead church from outside. Ooh, just lost my thing. Then we will, for the most part, lose who. Okay, I'm just going to start that all over. You read that thing up there. We must be strong, Church of God, Holiness, Pentecostal school. 2 years later, Cross addressed the same issue. I'm sure you're bearing in mind that as the school grows, there will be more of those who are non-Church of God in Lee College. In fact, last year, 22% of those attending Lee College were not Church of God people. Now, that may mean assemblies mixed in, right? They're not talking all not Pentecostal. While we want them to be Church of God, we cannot force upon them our way of life. We can only ask that they respect our teachings and uphold those things which we love and cherish. That's a subtle but important shift in tone, right? Both presidents acknowledged, the denominational, primacy, but Cross also recognized a growing constituency and held the door open for students from different backgrounds, people who did not practice in their homes probably the sort of holiness life that they expected. In 1966, after a year-long self-study, Lee's drive for accreditation hit full stride. Hughes and Walker met again with SACS representatives in Atlanta, who expressed a number of concerns. These concerns, by the way, shift with SACS. They start off very practical. They talked about needing to divide these different pieces of the educational enterprise. They said that really a four-year liberal arts school needed its own campus, that it couldn't share faculty with a Bible school. Lee had in mind they would just run the two institutions like they'd run everything else, not just side by side, but in the same buildings with classes next door. And SACS said that would be okay. Yeah. This number is great. They also said they needed to move the level of expenditure up from $200 a student to $300 a student, which was a stretch. That's, if you put in today's dollar, if they said, hey, 33% more spending per student, that's a lot, which Lee did. And then they also, and this turns out to be an interesting trend, it's about, if you're going to have a discipline, there has to be at least one person in each discipline with a doctorate. Just at least one. And Lee looked around, and we were really short of doctorates. And which begins a number of hires to get doctorates here, right? The first ones were actually people pulled off the mission field to come and provide that first core of people and quality. I will note, whenever you think about Nora Chambers, she went to Holmes Bible College, which still exists in Carolina. It's still a tiny holiness school. It's like 200 people in one building. And when you wonder why Nora Chambers, right? I'm pretty sure she is one of the only people in the Church of God with a degree, like the only person that I can tell that has even a two-year degree. I think it's important though for the school because they said it's important that we have somebody with some credentials for teaching. And when I think about accreditation, this is the sort of thing that Hughes liked. Here's a reason to force this, why we say a very positive change on the school in terms of standards as we go along. In 67, SACS announced a huge disappointment. They delayed the planned 68 site visit. This was a crushing moment for the school and leaked out and was made public. It was very embarrassing that SACS wasn't coming. And they pointed at a bunch of things, still faculty, library holdings, or some specific things. The other thing that happened in 68 that's really interesting is that people who were opposed to a move from the BTS model made use of was the visit of the old accrediting agency to AABC came to do their site visit. So if we weren't accredited by SACS, we'd still be accredited by the ABC. And what you see in that report are echoes of dissent and opposition from within the school to this move from a Bible training school, a Bible school model to what would become a liberal arts model. And I do have a couple of quotes for you here. Concern for SACS accreditation may be crowding out the Bible college program and leading the school away from its basic purpose, especially if the school would be enrolling non-Christians. While the evaluators conceded there would still be an evangelical Christian spirit, Their final judgment was that, quote, the school as a whole has departed from its original purpose, or perhaps more accurately, has expanded its educational program so as to overshadow almost completely such purposes, which is not inaccurate, I don't think. So you do have, there are these echoes of opposition, I think. The AABC report was scathing. It really was. It has some pretty tough language in it. But, was Lee abandoning its original purpose by expanding programs? Well, it's certainly leaving the BTS model, right? And it's certainly leaving a Bible school model, and it's pursuing a liberal arts college. So, if this change is taking place, then the Church of God, I think, approved. Because the Church of God the school is controlled really closely by the denomination. It was not in any way an independent actor. Not only did the church appoint the members of the board of directors, but top church leaders moved back and forth between denomination and college posts. This was very, very common. What we have sounds unusual. I mean, Hughes, Cross, and Kahn were all general overseers of the Church of God. In combination a lot. I didn't add these up. I should have had 8, 10, I'm done doing math, 10, 14, I don't know. It's like 20-something years worth of overseer experience. So the leadership that's pushing through the change, because 3 presidents are there through the accreditation process, Hughes, Cross, Kahn, they came directly from Church of God leadership. And I think that's important to note. Cross, I think, gives one of the more clear explanations of the move to a liberal arts model. He says, I think we must recognize the fact that not all young people are called to be ministers, missionaries, or musicians. There. I fully feel that God has called some, are you ready, to be school teachers, businessmen, and in fact, every walk of life. And he said, we need to provide that training here in a Church of God school with Church of God people for Church of God purposes, and not send people to UTK and to secular schools. So we were concerned there. If the AABC thought that we were becoming more liberal, Sachs had a really different view. These outsiders came into Lee and went, oh my gosh, what have we stepped into? And there's lots of great quotes, but I've given you one, my favorite. One who spends any considerable time on the campus, this is such great language, will observe a pervasive and quite distinctive spirit of religious commitment among faculty and students. A spirit which sets them apart from common society in personal habits and attitudes. That is holiness, is it not? Is that not the goal of holiness, to be set apart, right? So, any Church of God person would be saying, amen, The discipline of the Church of God guides and controls personal conduct to an extent that would be oppressive, if not intolerable, to a college community not dedicated to this religious faith. And I put the picture of I just can't get over the basketball uniforms. They're amazing. It's like baseball pants and shirts, and what's even better is we provided road uniforms for schools that came to play here. So we expected them, they just had a standard road, so they would come in, and they would be given uniforms to wear to play in our gym.
You gotta see the cheerleaders.
I almost put the cheerleaders on too. I just left the guys. One of the funny things is, I'm told that as things loosened up, they started cutting the bottoms off the pants. So they started off really low, and they cut them up. There was a little border, and they cut them up, and then just above the border, and then just a little higher, and then it was the Viking and not the Vikings. And but I say that just because. This looks really unusual even for 67.
I feel lust in my heart right now.
I'm sorry. While Sachs found that dedication admirable, it was really concerned about several things, and you can read as well as I can. Church control. They were very concerned. They believed that schools should be independent of the church, and found our situation pretty much probably extremely problematic. The Bible college, the Bible college should be separate from any liberal arts college. Faculty credentials, which we were working on, they saw that's something very practical sort of thing. Board composition, to also not only reflect a separation from the church, but also to make money. They said, they're all pastors. They said, you can't get any money out of these guys. You need cash coming in. And then academic freedom, which they said there is none. And the people here said, well, there is, just within our worldview, right? And the biggest problem was the Bible college. And this is the sticking point about what do you do about the old BTS model. You know, you said you could evolve it into a Bible college and run that alongside the school. The church had been shutting down piece after piece of all these entrepreneurial enterprises. Academies going away, the correspondence school is just about gone, the secretarial school for typing is gone. I mean, they've been narrowing it down to just this little, what do you do with a Bible college? And these were the options. Number one, create a completely separate Bible college. So have a liberal arts school and then someplace else a Bible school. Really expensive, never really explored. Second, maintain the Bible college alongside the new liberal arts school. They really wanted to do this. They wanted, to have both schools intertwined. SAC says no. So that killed that one. Third, create a department of religion within the liberal arts school, which would offer a mandatory minor. This is what was adopted. So the compromise with SACS and the church was, with SACS, we won't try to do the two things intertwined. For the church, we'll have a separate division, department of religion, and we'll have this mandatory 18-hour minor, and this will keep that core Bible identity still within the school. And then addendum, shortly thereafter, we also created the seminary, which is separate again, which suggests some interesting things that is a different paper along the way. So these are things that the school was dealing with as they worked towards accreditation. I want to leave a lot of time. I have in my notes, I have this big thing right there. It says, stop if taking too long. So I'm trying to decide if I really want to stop if I'm taking too long or not. I would say that what the school didn't compromise on were mission. It did not compromise on academic freedom. It wrote an academic freedom statement in 1968, then revised it and made it stricter, not more liberal. So it tightened it up even more. You know, the document we sign and really sort of vaguely give affirmation to about the statement of faith was introduced to help make sure that this line was held. So this was something that was just assumed everybody was Pentecostal, right? Truly Pentecostal. And then when you put a statement of faith in, that suggests there may be some doubt about that. So that compromise was not made. They also resisted putting what they called money men onto the board. They didn't want money men. They wanted pastors. But they did expand the board and bring in a couple people that were sort of at least small money men onto the board. And so this helped satisfy SACS. What changed at Lee, I think, and this will I'll compromise by doing, I'll leave that up. I think what changed at Lee, the big change is we left the Bible school model. There's no question that by 1970, in the fall of 70 when we opened, that model was history. I mean, the ABC was right. It also said at one point, the Bible school rapidly became just a memory, which it did. The liberal arts school becomes the dominant model with its department of religion. So that's a huge change. That's a huge shift. In my mind, when you look at, this is mine, not somebody else's, when you looked at this chart, and notice the arrow only goes one way, that's moved from the leftmost to the next. That's the start of that move. Now, it's not there yet. There's still, Lee's still here. It's still intentional and sectarian. When you're in 1970, it's not a big push to recruit anybody from outside of the church. Some people come. There's not a push for that. That move to a broader, even the next step in intentional evangelical school takes place after Dr. Kahn comes. So that hasn't happened yet. But the Bible training school model's changed. What I do think changed radically, and I think that the title that actually Carolyn came up with a better title than I could have thought of. What did change is that you see the emergence of a modern school, a modern liberal arts school, with credentials and facilities and accreditation. The positives that accreditation could bring were certainly there as well. Now the question though is, I think that's great because I was hired here. I was hired to this league. If I had been hired to the Bible training school, and I've been up at Sevierville, which was sort of a golden age of Bible training school, and then this happened, I might have been the one talking to the ABC and saying, you know what, this is really seriously wrong. We're abandoning our Bible training school model. And so this is the trick. On this scale, where's the sweet spot? And that's not going to be the same for every single person in this room, and certainly not generationally the same. Where are you comfortable resting along this line? So that's the story of, in short, of our accreditation. All right, questions, thoughts?
I have a question, John.
Sure.
I worked near Raleigh, North Carolina for many years, and we had a consultant that was able to identify the next 20 years these schools will be gone.
Yep.
Have you seen any research like that regarding this area? Like I'm thinking of a school like Bryan, for instance.
I think, no, I'm not. That's not part of why I study, and this is the hard thing. When you look at this, we know as historians, we all actually pretty much live in the past, as we like to tell our students. You know, the past just happened and happened. It just happened again. But what we can say is in schools in the past, this is what happens. There are hundreds of formerly, intentionally Christian schools in the United States. Matter of fact, I think if you want this school to become that, we'll go to one of the hundreds of schools, would be my argument. Because there are very few schools like Luke. Bryan's interesting. There's a couple of schools that have tried to reinvent themselves. Bryan, of course, does have a denominational support base. And we could, I'm not sure. But you could, but they're trying to reinvent themselves with a different model and a different constituency right now. That's what I believe. And it's a constituency that's a very sort of fundamentalist, legalistic constituency that they see. So we'll see if they succeed. It's interesting, when you read the president stuff, in the 50s and 60s, their stuff is full of the death of liberal arts colleges. I mean, it's every decade, there's all this literature about the death of liberal arts colleges. It's an ongoing concern. Thoughts? Yes?
I was kind of curious, based on your research, that critical mass stage, what
Yeah.
does that mean?
Yeah, I know. I did see, like I said, this is excerpt. Critical mass means enough. We're Christian enough. Well, how much is enough? Well, Christian enough is whatever it is. You know, at Lee right now, we say Christian enough is all of our full-time faculty are practicing Christians. Christian enough. Now, all of our adjuncts? No, not necessarily. Right? And there's some other categories of people we've already, not necessarily, but Christian enough. Not fully, but enough. So how much is enough? Well, what happens historically is that enough gets smaller and smaller and smaller over time. So critical mass changes. So Christian enough is, well, 2/3 or at least half, or, you know, there's a really strong remnant, and we got a great campus ministry, we got a chapel. That's enough, right? And then on our website, if you look in the history, you can and then you can see you've moved to heritage. You know, we once were, but we're not now. And then eventually, a lot of schools stop at heritage. They hang there for a very, very, very long time. But eventually you get to school like my mom's on TCU, which actually explains on its website, don't worry that Christian's part of our name. Right? So that's, you've moved another step. And so it's a shift. What I will say is, I think that the concern we should have at Lee is not looking over our shoulder to a threat from here. I don't think that threat exists in any real way. I think the threat is critical mass. I think the threat is, historically, the threat is not that we'll revert. That virtually never happens, and not permanently. The threat is that we lose who we are. And it's tricky because it's almost never a huge thing. It's lots and lots and lots of little things. And I've told my students, because we talk about this in capstone, I put this up and they said, where are we? And I said, I'll tell you what, I'll leave the room. You mark where you think we are. Which is a really interesting exercise. But I tell them it's like a bookshelf. I said, if we take something off the shelf, we took the Bible Minor off the shelf, it's no longer a thing. What do we put back on the shelf? Because if you just keep taking identity off, and you don't replace it with the things that are intentionally Christian, you replace them with other things, but then you lose identity. And it's lots of littles.
So my experience, and I've mentioned this before in these kind of settings, it's from the Assembly of God perspective. They intentionally created in 1955 a liberal arts college and left all of the regional Bible colleges intact. And then 2 years ago, the Assemblies of God merged that rogue liberal arts college with the Bible college in the same town and the seminary in the same town. it's merged, it's under one presidency now. And I attended Evangel, but I taught at Central Bible College. And so I have this mix of friends on Facebook, and the Central Bible College people are still enraged and hurt and feel like that whole Bible college thing, that original call, has been, raped. I mean, they're
Were they failing? Why did they encourage them? Was it a financial?
denominationally, they couldn't sustain it anymore. I mean, there were two complete.
But that also
full
says something
campuses,
important
3 miles apart.
about assemblies, is that you had lots of kids that want to go to Evangel and not many want to go to Central. So I think
Right.
when I look at Lee and how we've changed, I don't think the university drags the denomination. I think the university marches pretty much in step with the denomination. Go out, stand in front of any door, stand in front of a woman's door, and watch the women come in. And tell me, are we changing them from a holiness standard? And the answer is no. They're not coming from they're not coming from this intentional sectarian sort of standard. I mean, they're well far away from that.
The critical mass hypothesis makes a lot of intuitive sense, but it seems like Lee breaks the model in a fairly important way. Since I came here in '98, I was surprised when I came that they didn't require the students to sign any statement of faith. You don't have to be Christian to come to Lee,
Right.
which was very unusual among CCCU colleges.
Right.
But how far back did that decision go, to your knowledge? And doesn't that somehow make us a little different?
I'm not sure they ever required you to sign. Anybody know? I've never seen any evidence that there was a document students signed. It was just assumed that if you came to a school as tight as Lee or BTS, that you were automatically sort of conformed. I don't think we're at critical mass, by the way. If I was placing us on this, I wouldn't put us there. I'd still put us in intentional. I would say there are elements. I mean, this is what happens. There's things that suggest that might take place, but I still think we're intentional. That's my opinion. I mean, chapel
Can I
is
say
a nice
something about
feel
that?
of that. Yeah.
Students not being Christians. And I think from the very beginning, Lee has always believed that if you come here, you'll become a Christian. I think it's always had that sort of evangelical sense, and so I always tell the story about my family. We only had enough money to send one kid to Lee, and so they chose my sister because she was more in need of reformation than I was. so that, they got that right, actually. And I think, we used to have kids, that this preacher's kid has been sent here because they think we can reform them, and that was just...
Still have those people.
Exactly, yeah, exactly. And then I think that also, I don't think it was even thought of in those days that you might have non-Christians in the sense of Muslims or Hindus, but then because we had that openness, then when that kind of became a possibility, then that could happen too. So there hasn't ever been a time when you had to confess your commitment to Christ to be a student.
That seems like such a important distinction, because so many other denominational schools were places of protection. This is where we can send our kids to keep them safe, where instead we tried to be a place of transformation, which really
we allowed others to come, especially in the early years. We didn't court them; they showed up. So that changes, and that openness allows that change to take place. But we're not out early in the early years. I would say up through this period, looking, saying, please come. People would come, and there was an expectation. You couldn't help but be evangelized on this daily, probably. But it wasn't looking out. But you're right. I mean, schools like, say, Cedarville, which is doing very well. It's about the same size we are. I honestly think that's the model that Brian is trying to gain success with. There's not another school like that, I think, in our immediate area. 4,000 odd students. They've got a great big new nursing center as well, and they're in the middle of the corn. So there's nothing to attract you to Cedarville. Lots of cheap land. But when you come back to your sophomore year, you have to sign that document. It's a statement of faith that this is what I believe, and if you can't do that, then you won't be a sophomore in Cedarville. But yeah, we've never done that. But boy, you'd have to. The holiness standard was so high that you wouldn't last, I think.
God, you mentioned that you actually have left the room to let your students mark?
Oh, yeah.
Would you share a little bit with that?
They have us largely in intentional and critical. Almost all of them.
So between us,
Yeah. My most conservative students push us more towards heritage, and my most liberal students push us towards sectarian. But most of them have some one of those two. It is interesting though how many of them identify as critical mass now.
Can I just throw out some other things that I think that aren't quite as visible, but when I came here in 1968, our yearbook was published at the print shop, at the printing house. Our bookstore was Pathway Press. We didn't have our own bookstore. When computers were invented, we were on the mainframe with the denomination. So if they were going to run payroll, we had to stop registration until they were through or whatever. So we were really even though we had done this big transition and become a separate entity, we were still connected in many
Financially
ways.
as well. There's
Yes.
all sorts of money moving back and forth between, especially the printing
Yes.
house,
Yeah.
and the publishing and the university. We would loan them money and they would give it back, and they would loan us money and we give it back.
I had the privilege of going over there and saying, yeah, guess what, we're not going to do our yearbook here anymore. And it was not, it wasn't the best meeting
No.
I've ever had. I mean, it's not that big a deal, but it was that big a deal. And it wasn't just the money, it was the money, but it wasn't just the money. It was like, you're ripping another one of the ties that have bound us together. The other thing I think, we used to have a banner of the Declaration of Faith hanging in every classroom. And the Declaration of Faith was on the contract that you signed, I think until almost 2000. It was somewhere, I think it happened while I was vice president. I didn't do it, but I think it was, around so when you signed your contract, you're agreeing to the articles on the Declaration of Faith.
Yeah, I don't want to suggest, and you're absolutely right, that it was like a clean,
Oh, no, yeah.
it was definitely not a clean break. It was clean enough to satisfy Saks.
Yeah.
Whatever that minimum requirement was, I think. Yeah. Yes.
Are there changes that precipitate other changes rapidly? So you mentioned this punctuated equilibrium. And other schools that have moved into heritage and beyond, are there periods of change where they did this and then within 3 or 4 years this happened, and so
Sometimes it goes really quickly. And you can note that with Dr. Khan moving us very quickly from intentional sectarian to intentional evangelical. I mean, that, in historical terms, that was fast, right? So that you can do the same thing almost as fast, especially if there's financial crises. Financial crises mean a lot of schools that all bets off. And I just, if our university is asked to affirm a government policy that we otherwise oppose or lose our funding, which one do you do? And that sort of financial thing can very rapidly shift. Now, as I noted in my previous paper, the last push for desegregation was a letter from the federal government saying, we can't seem to find your desegregation statement, and I'm afraid you're going to lose your federal funding. And suddenly, from 3 years back, the desegregation statement reappeared, and we mailed it off. And so that was the final thing that pushed that over the carbon. So finances are huge. And usually that's accompanied with a leadership change for obvious reasons. If there's a problem at the school financially, you bring in this new leader who has a new vision that will get you out of whatever the crisis.
Let me throw something else out there too. One thing that we notice in the Council for Christian Colleges and Universities and the coming and going in that organization, two things are not financial. One is required chapel. Once you give up required chapel, it seems like that is a catalyst to a lot of other changes, and also insisting that faculty be vocally Christian. If you let that one go, then that's also something that tends to move you down that scale a lot faster.
And sometimes it can be a desire to improve your lot, to move up a notch on the rank. And we know from our searches, we have amazing faculty, but at Little Quincy University, a Franciscan sort of school that I used to teach at, when we advertised for a historian, we had over 100 applicants. You know, we make the same advertisement here, we get what, Randy?
20.
Yeah, 20. And that's, you know, and so there are a bunch of people that would obviously look here. So I think that's absolutely right. I think of practicing Christians. I mean, Randy has this great question. We were doing a search once, and he finished it. He goes, you know, just Jared, outstanding job. We've had a great interview. Just tell me about your life in your local church. And we had one person, and it was just dead silence for 30 seconds. He had looked up all the stuff, right? But actually. Yeah.
I'll join one if you want me to.
Yes, exactly. But that idea of practicing is huge. You know, and our faculty, this is, to me, this is the single most important thing. It is people that are practicing Christians who live out their faith in real and meaningful ways.
I was going to say, you know, those of us who've gone through the sort of application process in recent memory, that's less recent than it used to be for me. And you're in conversation with members of your cohort in graduate school who are also on the job market, and they're, you know, how can you do this? Go to this small sectarian school in the South. You find yourself saying things like, no, actually, it's pretty good.
Yeah.
Well, what about academic freedom? Not a problem. Well, how do you just have to be a Christian. If you're a Christian, this is a comfortable place to work. What does that mean?
Yeah.
Do you have to sign a statement? No. What's the orthodoxy? You have to like Jesus.
Yes.
I'm kind of finding myself using the word "please" unique. This suggests that maybe we're not so unique, but maybe we're poised at a really interesting place on this trajectory, and not many other schools are at a similar place.
I would love to hold this equilibrium. Yeah, if it's punctuated, I would like to be at this equilibrium for a very long time. And I think that the very long tenure Dr. Kahn, who has created this, is protected that. Which leads to a concern: what happens when Dr. Kahn's gone, right? Which is a serious question. I think the chapel thing is really significant. People hate. Boy, if you want to get somebody fired up, say the way you do chapel is an important symptom of your life as a Christian. Boy, people get really angry quick, especially people who've abandoned chapel. Because what you're saying is, you don't do chapel, and they're like, well, no. And you're like, well, then what you're claiming, really? And they're no. So, chapel was 5 days a week plus an expectation of Wednesday night, Sunday night, and local church on Sunday morning. So it's sort of really, that's, 8 plus your own local church. That was sort of the expectation for a very long time. And revivals, right, and as well. Now we have 2 times, 75% attendance, right? Roughly at least a third of our students are exempt from chapel. And some of our chapel services are very chapel-y, and some are less chapel-y, you know what I mean? And you're going, okay, but we're okay with that. Well, that's fine, but just recognize that that's really different than, 3 days a week or 2 days a week with more chapel and tight attendance and very few exemptions. And what this tells you is the next thing is you move to something like, what do we call it, Baylor? Why don't you forum or something where, also some of your musical stuff that you go to, that can count as chapel, because that's important, right? God did music, so you can count that as well. And then you're like, well, seniors don't, come on, they've done chapel a lot, right? So let's just exempt all the seniors and all the juniors, and let's just do it once a week, and then let's do it at night. And then you get to where you were at Baylor, where you went your first semester for like 2/3 of the time, and I think I saw one person I thought was actually a chapel speaker. Grant Taft promised me that we'd win the Cotton Bowl, and he lied to me. But that's the one I remember. It's Grant Taft swearing to me we'd win the Cotton Bowl football. So it's a serious measure. It's not the cause though. It's just it reflects something else. When you look back at that list I had, it's not those things cause change. Those are changes that are symptoms of a deeper change in the university. And the reason I do this is if you're thoughtful about it, right? If you're careful about it, if you work hard at it, you can hold that equilibrium, I think, for quite some time. We know schools that have. But Wheaton isn't the same Wheaton it was. Calvin certainly isn't the same Calvin it was. They're moving too. They're just moving slowly. And what's really hard is I really see this declensionist argument, historically at least, to be very accurate. We're moving too. But boy, I want to move as slow as humanly possible, right? And I tell people, a guy told me this when I was at Cedarville one time, he said, listen, we don't expect everybody to do things the way we do it, but we invite people that want to come here. And I feel that way. You know, I wouldn't go to a Church of God service and tell somebody to put up the tambourine, but I wouldn't go to a PCA service and pull out the tambourine either. And so, as faculty here at Lee, we've joined this community, right? And I hope we're not trying to push or pull it, either way. Chris was really uncomfortable. He's like, tambourine?
You'd be out the door.
I can't really get my hands above my shoulders.
The tambourine can be played down at the hip.
Down PCA, we kind of carry the TV. Any other final thoughts? Yeah.
I had a question. Somebody in the room probably knows the answer. Jose and I were talking about the when the change went from sectarian to evangelical.
Yeah.
That happened with faculty too.
Yes.
So do we know who the first person that wasn't Church of God hired as a teacher here? Was it
Carrie, who was that?
Carolyn would know?
Yeah.
Did they survive?
I believe it was a Roman Catholic taught Spanish, and I can't remember her name.
So we went all in.
Was she before Snell?
We didn't just hop over to like a Baptist. We just skipped.
Well, actually, there was a Methodist taught the English, tall guy that played the flute.
Well, Bertha Googler taught here in
Yeah,
Yeah.
she was
the
in
mid-60s. I think she was full-time. She was Methodist.
That's interesting because that suggests that if that's the 60s, it suggests that, again, much like students, there wasn't a super hard prohibition. It was just a,
Yeah. We've always had non-Church of God people, but not in mass.
Right.
And
Not in mass.
Not in the religious area.
No,
either.
yeah.
Music, they can't do much damage.
Right.
Turn around, we'll get with you.